Have you ever devoted your entire life to a place, only to be kicked out like a stranger without so much as a thank you? Can you imagine the feeling of betrayal, not by one person, but by an entire system you once trusted completely? They didn't just take away my job. They nearly stole the future I bled and cried to build. And the worst part? I saw it coming, but I couldn't get out of the way in time. My name is Clara Simmons. I am 60 years old, and on a damp Friday afternoon in Kansas City, I officially became excess. I had been with Dawson Systems for 28 years, 11 months, and 28 days. Just 2 more days, and my full retirement package, worth nearly $500,000, would have kicked in, the final reward for nearly 3 decades of steady dedication. I used to imagine that moment like a golden ticket to retirement. I had plans to move closer to my daughter in Oregon, buy a small lakeside cabin, grow tomatoes and live out the rest of my days in peace, but all of that turned to ash in just 12 minutes and 18 seconds on the 9th floor. "Miss Clara, please come in." I had never heard the executive assistant's voice sound so hollow. Every nerve in my body screamed a warning as I stepped into the room. I had never been summoned to the executive office on a Friday afternoon, especially not with him staring fixedly at the light brown envelope on the desk, instead of looking me in the eye. Brent Holloway, the new CEO, 8 months into his role, infamous for his nickname the Streamliner, the man who slashed over 60 positions in his first quarter. I had never worked with him directly, but what I knew was enough to make me wary. "Clara, how long have you worked here again?" His voice was light, like he was asking whether I preferred tea or coffee. 28 years, 11 months, 28 days, I replied without hesitation. I knew that number like the back of my hand. Every day, every night, every long year I gave to this company, I remembered clearly. Brent nodded slightly, then sighed, like he was mourning something, but I knew it was all an act. "Very impressive," he said, then pushed the envelope toward me. "But unfortunately, due to budget restructuring, we are forced to downsize. And your position has been affected. The decision is effective immediately." The room seemed to tilt. I didn't react. I didn't scream, didn't slam the table, didn't beg. Instead, I looked him straight in the eye and asked, "What was the company's profit last quarter, Mr. Holloway?" He flinched slightly but kept a calm facade. "I don't think this is the right time to—" $6.7 million, I cut in. "And you're saying this is about the budget?" He shrugged. "Clara, this decision came from above, my hands are tied, this is the severance package. 3 months' salary, on the condition that you sign the waiver by 5 p.m. tomorrow." I took the envelope but didn't open it. My hands were ice cold. In my mind one number kept repeating. 2 days. Just 2 more days, and the retirement fund I'd waited my whole life for would have been mine. But they weren't going to give me that chance. They knew and they planned for this. "Thank you for the opportunity," I said, my voice so calm it surprised even me. Brent looked up, clearly surprised that I wasn't making a scene. But he had forgotten one thing. I was the one who had uncovered more than 40 internal violations during my 20-plus years as a compliance officer. I could read shady moves by the way someone breathed. And this time, their game was painfully obvious. I left the office like a quiet wind. No tears, no looking back. But inside me, a fire had begun to burn. I didn't yet know what I would do next, but I knew one thing for certain. They picked the wrong person to cast aside. I didn't sign. I didn't open the envelope. Didn't ask questions. Didn't beg for a last chance. I just stood up, smiled just enough to make Brent Holloway shudder, and walked out of that polished, hollow office with the only thing they couldn't take from me. My dignity. By the time I stepped out of Dawson Systems, the rain had started to fall hard. I didn't rush to open my umbrella. That rain felt as cold as the years I had sacrificed for this company. Those nights I stayed at the office until nearly midnight reviewing reports, the holidays canceled last minute because of surprise audits. The dinners I ate alone under pale fluorescent lights because no one else would look at the numbers. I should have been angry, but all I felt was emptiness. Not because I was fired, but because they thought I would walk away that easily. I had seen this coming months ago. Ever since Brent Holloway took charge and began his organizational restructuring, I knew his type. Clean-cut, charming with a voice like sugar, but hands stained with dirt. He didn't cut jobs to save money, he cut for the numbers on the profit sheet. Every name crossed off was a plus mark on his performance record with the board of directors. I wasn't just the next name, I was an obstacle. Because I knew too much. Because I had been secretly collecting evidence for 4 years. From the first flicker of suspicion to the long months of pretending to be the loyal employee just to survive. I got home just as the rain stopped. My small apartment in the northern suburbs of Kansas City was silent. I brewed a pot of black tea, pulled out the key to a gray filing cabinet pressed against the wall. Behind the row of file clips was a small metal box with 3 locks. I called it my survival box. Inside were copies of altered financial reports, internal emails ordering backdated contracts, memos with falsified data, and an external hard drive containing the full archive of accounting files since the year 2020. I never planned to use any of it, but I kept it, because after more than 2 decades in compliance, my instincts told me one day someone would try to bury me quietly. And that day had finally come. I pulled out my phone, opened my contacts, and scrolled down to a name I had never deleted, even though I hadn't used it in 6 years. Logan Barrett. Logan had once been the chief financial officer of Dawson Systems. He left quietly in the year 2017, right after a shady merger I never believed was clean. We had never been close, but Logan had always respected me. One of the few who treated me as a real colleague, not just that cranky audit lady. Now he was working for the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. I made the call. My heartbeat was steady and clear. When he picked up, his voice was deep, just like I remembered. Clara, is that really you? Hi Logan, it's been a while, I replied, keeping my voice steady. I think it's time we had a serious conversation. He was silent for a few seconds, then said, Go on. I gave a brief summary of what happened. The termination, the timing, and Brent's phony excuse. Then I told him about the documents I had. About 4 years of data that could bring down the entire executive tier at Dawson Systems. Not a single interruption, just a heavy silence on the other end. Then Logan asked, Can you be in DC by Monday? I nodded, though I knew he couldn't see it. I'll be there, and I'm bringing everything. Before we hung up, he said something I'll never forget. You know what, Clara? They picked the wrong person to silence. That night, I didn't sleep. I spent the entire night scanning every document, numbering them, organizing them chronologically. I wrote a detailed summary of the violations, along with annotations for every time I had issued an internal warning. All of which had been ignored or twisted. By dawn, I had printed out 3 identical sets of files. One for the SEC, one for my personal attorney, and one in case I needed to protect myself. When the first light of day slipped through the curtains, I stood up, poured a glass of water, and looked at myself in the mirror. I might have looked tired, but in my eyes there was fire. Not the fire of anger, but the fire of a woman who knows she's doing the right thing. And has nothing left to lose. The war had begun. I arrived in Washington, D.C. on Sunday evening, carrying an old silver-gray suitcase packed with documents that could dismantle an entire empire. I booked a small room at a hotel near the SEC headquarters, not for the amenities, but because I wanted to be close to the one place I could still trust. The law. On Monday morning, I wore my dark blue suit, the one I had always saved for special occasions, only this time, it wasn't for a boardroom meeting. It was for the biggest confrontation of my life. I reached the SEC building at 8:43 a.m. The air there held that invisible chill of power and regulation, the kind I had once stood beside, only to be hurt by its silence for many years. Logan Barrett was already waiting in the lobby. He looked older than the last time I saw him, his hair streaked with gray, but his eyes were just as sharp as ever. "Clara," he gave my hand a gentle squeeze. "Are you ready?" "Never been more ready," I replied, my voice hard as steel. We walked into a large conference room, soundproofed with glass walls, black leather chairs arranged in a U-shape. 2 others were already there. Eleanor Wu, a senior attorney in the enforcement division, and Patrick Doyle, a veteran financial analyst and investigator. Eleanor didn't waste any words. "Miss Simmons, before we begin, I want to confirm, you are voluntarily providing this information and documentation to the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, with full understanding of your rights and legal responsibilities, correct?" I nodded. "Completely voluntary, and I'm here because the truth deserves to be heard." The hearing began. I opened the first binder and pulled out the summary of violations. Manipulated revenue timing, legitimized suspicious expenses, falsified product quality certifications, and collusion with a subsidiary to inflate stock value. Patrick frowned immediately as he flipped through the first few pages. "This number? It's fake?" I nodded, pointing to a line in the notes. "This is the Q4 report for the year 2022. Reported revenue rose 22%, but in reality, 38% of it came from orders that were either cancelled or never paid." They pulled figures from the following quarter, even from the next year. Eleanor interjected, her voice cold and precise. "Do you have proof that senior executives were aware of this?" I opened a folder of printed emails, marked with a red paperclip. Pages 5 through 12. Mr. Brent Holloway directly instructed the accounting department to backdate contracts to validate the report. In one email he even states, "We need to make these numbers shine. Don't let the board see any shortfall." Patrick scanned a few lines, then looked up, eyes wide. "Good Lord! This isn't just internal misconduct, this is systemic fraud." I nodded, feeling like someone was finally seeing the full picture I'd spent 4 years building on my own. Over the next 3 hours, I walked them through 7 major financial manipulations, detailing each time I issued internal warnings and was ignored. I also presented evidence of tampered quality certifications, where Brent approved a batch of untested products just to meet a shipping deadline, regardless of customer risk or consumer safety. Eleanor sat still for a moment, tapping her fingers lightly on the table. "I've worked at the SEC for 18 years. I've never seen a fraud system this smooth, this reckless, wrapped so neatly under the guise of restructuring." Patrick turned to me. "Do you have evidence this impacted the stock price?" I pulled out a chart. "This is internal data used in investment presentations, fabricated growth figures. From June to September last year, stock value rose nearly 40% due to falsified financials. And here's a message between the current CFO and Brent. They knew exactly what they were doing." Logan nodded in confirmation. "I verified some of those numbers back when I was still at Dawson. They didn't match the actual data at all." Eleanor slid the documents back toward me. "Ms. Simmons, under SEC Rule 20.f, you qualify for protection as a whistleblower. We will initiate a formal investigation immediately, starting with seizing Dawson Systems data servers." Patrick looked at me intently. "And I have to be honest, if what you've given us continues to check out, we're not just talking about an unfair dismissal, we're looking at a securities fraud case that could send people to prison." I paused for a beat, then said, "I didn't come here for revenge. I came here for justice. Because no one, no matter how powerful, has the right to bury the truth without facing the consequences." The meeting ended just before noon. As I stepped out of the room, my feet felt steadier than they ever had. Before, I had thought I was just another discarded employee. But now, I realized I was the last one brave enough to shine a light on the darkness they tried to bury. And the first light had just begun to break through. I had only been back in Kansas City for 1 day when the phone started ringing like an alarm siren, not just one call, but non-stop. From early morning until late evening. As if all of Dawson Systems had lost control. The first name to appear was Linda Hayward, head of human resources, the woman who had been avoiding me for years, as if I were a living reminder of the ethics they didn't want to face. I didn't answer. Her voicemail came after 3 beeps. Clara, I hope you're carefully considering the severance offer. There's still time to resolve this quietly. Not an apology, not a single sign of remorse, just fear. And I knew why. 3 hours later, it was Brent Holloway's turn. I listened to his voice, rushed and cornered, on the recording. Clara, we understand there may have been a misunderstanding. Let's talk like former colleagues. I can come by if that's easier for you. But please, don't let this go too far. Go too far? I almost laughed. They wanted me to bury the truth to preserve their clean image? And now that the truth was clawing its way out of the mud, they said I was taking things too far? I stayed silent. And that silence was what drove them mad. That evening I was making tea when the doorbell rang. Through the small window beside the door, I saw a black sedan parked out front. And the man on the doorstep? None other than Brent Holloway. I stood behind the door, still holding the warm teacup, listening to him call out. Clara, it's me, Brent. I didn't come to argue, I just want to return some documents, a chance to end this peacefully. I didn't answer. Didn't open the door. Didn't react. I just stood there, letting him feel the chill of the truth tightening around the collar of his tailored suit. After nearly 5 minutes of mixing soft words with veiled threats, he left a thick envelope in my mailbox and drove off. I waited until his car was completely out of sight before stepping out. Inside the envelope was a new non-disclosure agreement. Still offering 3 months' salary, but now with an added clause. No further disclosure of any documents to third parties. I folded the paper and tossed it into the kitchen drawer without reading the rest. At that moment, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Rumors of the SEC investigation have leaked. Emergency meeting tonight at headquarters. They're panicking. I wasn't surprised. By the next morning, an email from Dawson Systems' legal department appeared in my personal inbox. The subject line was in all caps. Termination decision suspended, request to maintain employment status. Section 47. The content was filled with vague phrases like, under review, internal reassessment, and consideration of legality. But I knew all too well. This wasn't goodwill. It was a strategic retreat. They were trying to freeze the situation, hoping to turn the tide. That afternoon I received a video call from Elizabeth, my daughter. She lives in Portland, Oregon. Far removed from the chaos I was facing. But today her voice carried a strain of frustration. Mom, I just read an article. It says, you're trying to sue the company for personal reasons. They're painting you as vengeful. I pressed my lips together, keeping my voice steady. They can write whatever they want, Elle, but the truth is still the truth. And I'm ready to show the world exactly that. There was a pause, then she said softly, I'm proud of you, Mom. After the call, I opened my laptop and checked the news. Just as Elizabeth said, some financial news sites were beginning to shift the narrative. Quoting anonymous, internal sources, suggesting I was bitter about not getting promoted, and distorting facts for personal gain. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The company had entered the media counterattack phase. They knew they couldn't stop the investigation, so now they were targeting my reputation. A cowardly move. But not a surprising one. And I no longer had time for fear. I opened the safe and pulled out a set of documents I hadn't submitted yet. Old emails from the previous CEO. Cryptic discussions about how to polish reports before shareholder meetings. Proof that the fraud scheme began long before Brent Holloway came on the scene. If they wanted to fight me with rumors, I would fight back with truth they couldn't deny. 3 days after I declined the non-disclosure agreement for the 3rd time, an official email from Dawson Systems was sent to my attorney. The subject line was simple. Invitation to emergency meeting with executive leadership. There was no apology, no acceptance of responsibility, just a cold, mandatory invitation, a final attempt to extinguish the flame they had lit themselves. But this time, I wasn't going alone. I arrived with my personal attorney, Miranda Ellis, a woman with more than 30 years of corporate legal experience, eyes sharp as a scalpel and a voice that could slice through any excuse. At 9 o'clock in the morning, we stepped into the conference room on the 16th floor. The same floor where, not long ago, I had been cast out like surplus. The glass doors clicked shut behind me with a dry snap, marking the start of a battle they no longer had control over. Seated at the long table were 3 board members, the company's legal counsel, and Brent Holloway, his face noticeably paler than the last time I had seen him. Charles Brenner, the chairman of the board, spoke first, his voice weak like he hadn't slept in days. "Miss Simmons, thank you for coming. First, I want to express that we deeply regret the recent events. There may have been a misunderstanding in how the situation was handled." I tilted my head slightly, my lips curving into a cold smile. "The misunderstanding you speak of nearly robbed me of the retirement benefits I spent my entire life building." Brent sat motionless, eyes flicking toward me before quickly dropping to the folder in front of him. "People who've been exposed often do that." Miranda clasped her hands, leaning slightly forward. "Before we continue, my client needs confirmation. Has the termination of Ms. Clara Simmons been officially rescinded?" The company's legal counsel, a man in his 50s named Dean Morris, gave a stiff nod. "Yes. Ms. Simmons is now considered an employee with full reinstatement of all benefits, including salary, insurance, and, most importantly, her full, seniority-based retirement package." I said nothing. I simply opened my briefcase, pulled out a thick folder, and placed it on the table. The sharp thud it made seemed to freeze the entire room. "What I've brought here is not for negotiation," I said slowly. "I'm not interested in a promise of goodwill, nor in a 'we apologize for the inconvenience' letter. I'm here to make one thing clear. Every document I possess, and have submitted to the SEC, will be disclosed, accurately, completely, and without concealment." Dean cleared his throat, attempting to remain calm. "Ms. Simmons, perhaps we should consider a settlement approach. The company is prepared to—" Miranda raised her hand to cut him off. "No settlement will be discussed until the federal investigation is concluded." I looked directly at Charles Brenner, the same man who never once acknowledged me in the hallway, and enunciated each word. "I will speak the truth. Whether that saves or destroys Dawson's systems depends entirely on what you choose to do from this point forward." No one replied. They knew exactly what I had in my hands. After a tense silence, Charles took a deep breath and tried to shift his tone. "We genuinely value your professional integrity. Given your experience, Dawson would like to invite you back, but this time in a new role: Corporate Ethics Reform Advisor." I raised an eyebrow and responded slowly. "Reform?" After trying to silence me with hush money and pushing me out like a pawn past her turn. Brent finally spoke, his voice small and shaky. "Clara, I didn't think it would go this far." I looked at him coldly. "You didn't think, because you never imagined anyone would dare to stand up to you." Miranda continued, her tone still razor-sharp. "If my client is to consider any role at this company, all terms must be written clearly in a binding agreement, along with a legal commitment from the board that every past misconduct will be subject to an independent investigation. No one receives immunity." The room sank into suffocating silence. No one objected, because they knew they no longer had the power to bargain. We left the meeting just before noon. On the way to the parking lot, Miranda glanced at me and gave a small nod. "You made that entire room afraid to breathe." I smiled, but deep down I didn't feel relief, because I knew this was only the beginning. The truth is a sharp blade. It doesn't just cut the chains that bound me. It slices through the false moral facade Dawson's systems used to hide the rot within. And I was going to see it through to the end. 3 days after the meeting with the executive board, I woke up to a quiet morning and noticed my phone flashing non-stop like it was on fire. messages, missed calls, emails. From old friends, former colleagues, even names I didn't recognize. But when I opened the homepage of a major financial news site, I immediately understood what had just erupted. Clara Simmons, whistleblower who exposed financial scandal at Dawson Systems, the headline scrolled across the screen. Just below was a photo of me from my time at the company. My face, serious under the pale glow of the old office lights. And then other news outlets followed suit. A 60-year-old woman with nearly 30 years of experience bravely comes forward to expose fraud at one of the Midwest's largest tech corporations. Dawson Systems faces federal investigation after veteran employee provides hundreds of pages of evidence. I sat still in front of the screen, not out of fear, but because the truth had finally broken through the invisible walls they once built to cage it. But just one day later, I realized Dawson would not go down quietly. It started with a leaked internal perspective article from a small publication. Brent Holloway appeared, his tone so sincere it made me sick. We've always aimed for transparency. It's unfortunate that certain individuals, perhaps driven by personal disappointment or motives, have chosen to misrepresent data in ways that harm the. He didn't mention my name, but everyone knew who he meant. The next day he gave a televised interview on a local news channel, wearing a navy blue suit and a smile as weak as day-old coffee. Perhaps Miss Simmons felt left behind after the restructuring. We can't rule out the possibility that this is an emotional response, lacking objectivity. He wanted to turn me into a bitter old woman. An employee hurt by being let go. A woman who couldn't accept being left behind. But he forgot the most important thing. I wasn't fighting alone anymore. On Monday morning, the SEC held a short press conference at their Kansas City field office. Their spokesperson declared, "We confirm that Ms. Clara Simmons is a federally protected whistleblower. All documents provided by her are under serious investigation. There is no indication that her actions were driven by personal motives." Immediately after, they released an official statement to major media outlets, demanding an end to the spread of unverified information, and warning of legal consequences should further attempts to discredit the whistleblower continue. For the first time in days I exhaled, but I knew, the real battlefield still lay ahead. That night, I opened the safe in my home. Inside was a set of documents I had never shared, not with the SEC, not with my attorney, not with anyone. It was evidence of misconduct dating back to the year 2015, when Dawson Systems' previous CEO, Harold Gilman, was still in charge. I had once discovered inflated expense reports used to create off-the-books travel funds. There were also emails between Harold and one of the current board members, discussing temporarily moving data to a subsidiary to avoid surprise audits. Back then, I kept it only out of unease. Now, it had become the weapon that would destroy their final line of defense. The excuse that all wrongdoing began with Brent Holloway. The next morning, I reached out directly to Eleanor Wu, the lead attorney on the SEC's investigative team. I have additional documents, but this time, they go beyond Holloway. They show that the entire fraud model began under Gilman. I sent over the copies that same day. Just 2 hours later, Eleanor called back, her voice nearly trembling with intensity. "Clara, this is the death blow. It proves the board has been silent for years. At least 3 of them knew, and still signed off on the financial reports." "They didn't just do wrong," I replied. "They conspired." 3 days later, the SEC expanded its investigation. 4 additional board members were summoned. The media erupted. Several major shareholders began dumping stock, causing Dawson Systems' share value to plunge more than 27% in just 48 hours. The press no longer called me a disgruntled whistleblower. They now referred to me as the woman who exposed nearly a decade of corporate fraud. When my daughter called, her voice was proud and emotional. "Mom, do you know? You're not just my mom anymore. You're a role model for an entire generation." I smiled, my voice low. I don't need to be a role model for anyone, I just refuse to bow to liars. 10 days after the SEC officially expanded its investigation, Dawson Systems' entire executive leadership began collapsing like a glass tower cracking at its foundation. The news spread fast. No need to wait for the press. Inside the company, it felt like an earthquake. 4 board members resigned on the same morning. No statements, no farewell handshakes. They vanished from the internal system, from the company's website, and from the power seats they had occupied for more than a decade. A few hours later, David Langston was officially terminated for severe ethical violations, along with a statement that the company would fully cooperate with investigative authorities. I sat in front of the live news broadcast, watching him walk out of the building with a pale, sunken face. Nothing left of the CEO who once tossed me out like worthless garbage. But it didn't stop there. 2 days later, I received a call from Miranda, my attorney. "Clara, big news, the U.S. Attorney's Office has filed criminal charges against Langston." "What charges?" I asked, though I had a strong guess. "Securities fraud, obstruction of a federal investigation, and abuse of power to manipulate financial reports for personal gain. He's facing up to 20 years in prison if convicted." I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt something like balance being restored. Late, but finally, justice had spoken. 2 days after that, I was invited to the temporary headquarters of Dawson Systems for a private meeting. It was led by Patricia Lyle, the interim CEO. A woman who had served as COO for 8 years and had always kept her distance from shady decisions. The new office was empty. No fake honor plaques, no posters about core values they never followed. Patricia stood when I walked in and offered her hand. "Thank you for coming, Clara. I'll be brief. We owe you. For the truth. For integrity. And for something this company had long lost. Professional ethics." I didn't speak. I simply looked her in the eye, not seeking remorse, but searching for whether Patricia truly understood the damage her system had caused. She placed a thick folder in front of me and flipped to the first page. "We are officially restoring all your benefits, including full retirement, along with a compensation package equal to 5 years of salary. In addition, the company will cover lifetime health insurance for you and your dependents. This is a decision from the new board." I nodded. Miranda reviewed the documents carefully and found no flaws. Patricia continued. "Furthermore, I'm authorized to extend a formal invitation. We hope you'll accept the role of Senior Ethics Advisor, helping us redesign the compliance and ethics oversight system for the entire corporation." I sat silent for a few seconds, letting the quiet speak for me. Finally, I shook my head. I don't want to return to a place that once used power to silence the truth. Patricia was momentarily stunned, but quickly regained her composure. I continued. "I went from being tossed out like trash to being smeared, to being invited back as if nothing ever happened. But I don't need a title to feel worthy. I just need to know that the truth won." Miranda nodded in quiet agreement. I stood up and picked up the compensation agreement, not to return, but to close the chapter. 3 weeks later, I was at the Midwest Regional SEC office, signing an agreement to help build a national whistleblower protection program. Eleanor Wu shook my hand firmly. "We want to tap into your real-world experience. No one understands what it feels like to be turned on by an entire organization better than you." I smiled, feeling truly light for the first time. If I can help someone else avoid the fear I once lived through, then I still have work to do. From that point on, I began working with the SEC as an advisor. No grand title, no corner office, no flashy perks, just me. Clara Simmons, a 60-year-old woman who had once nearly been buried in silence. Now a voice for those pushed aside simply for speaking the truth. I didn't choose this path to become famous. I chose it because I could no longer turn my back on myself. And if I had to start over at this age, I would begin with integrity. I don't need to be anyone's role model, I just refuse to bow to deception. 6 months after David Langston was convicted, I received a letter from the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. The envelope was thick, sealed with an official stamp, and inside was a notification regarding the whistleblower award. I was granted 15% of the total civil penalties Dawson Systems was ordered to pay, a figure amounting to nearly $2.4 million. When Miranda read the amount aloud from the letter, she paused for a few seconds, her eyes silently asking, "What will you do with it all, Clara?" I just smiled softly. "I know I'm not spending it on a lakeside mansion or a new car." I had thought about this for a long time. During sleepless nights, when the question, "Why me?" clung to my mind, I remembered Thomas, my husband. The man who always believed in integrity, in standing for what was right, even when it meant standing alone. Thomas passed away 11 years ago from cancer. He had been a professor of business ethics at the University of Missouri, and he always told me, "Clara, integrity is the one thing you can't borrow. Either you have it, or you don't." I never forgot those words. And so, I used most of that money to establish the Thomas Simmons Scholarship Fund, dedicated to female students studying corporate ethics and compliance. Part of the fund goes toward tuition assistance, and the rest supports practical training programs on whistleblowing and defending workplace ethics. On the fund's launch day, I stood at the podium in the auditorium of the University of Missouri, looking out at rows of students, mostly young faces, eyes filled with ideals and curiosity. I began with a line that wasn't in my notes. "If anyone tells you that integrity is a weakness, remember my story." A 60-year-old woman, nearly left with nothing after almost 3 decades of work, but in the end, the one still standing when the curtain of lies was pulled back. The room fell silent. I told them about Dawson Systems, not as a tragedy, but as a hard-earned lesson. I told them about the nights I sat alone at my desk, knowing I was facing a system that didn't want to change. I told them about the betrayal, and then the resolve not to let that betrayal happen to anyone else. They listened, took notes, and a few shed tears. And when I ended with, "Integrity is not the price you pay, it is the asset you protect," the entire hall rose to a standing ovation. And Dawson Systems? They didn't collapse completely as many expected. After fines, prosecutions, and a complete overhaul, they still exist, but as a very different company. A new executive team was installed, reporting procedures are now overseen by an independent third party, and quarterly ethics and compliance trainings are mandatory for all employees. What surprised me most was this. One of the key case studies in that training is my story. I know because one day, a new employee at Dawson, a young woman named Marissa, sent me an email. "I just wanted to say, today was the first time I heard about you in orientation training. I couldn't believe a company that once tried to destroy you now teaches your story as an example. But I feel proud knowing you still chose to do what's right, even when no one stood with you. Thank you for not staying silent." I read that email 3 times. For a moment I thought of the Clara from 2 years ago. The woman who sat quietly at her desk, asked to sign a worthless settlement, with her entire future only 3 days away. I thought of the long nights of worry, of the loneliness, when everyone turned their back. Then I thought of this moment. When I no longer had to stay silent. When my story became a tool to awaken the next generation. And I knew I had won, not with power, but with resilience. Now, every week, I work out of a small SEC office on the University of Missouri campus, helping build new whistleblower protection policies. We design training programs, write practical guides, and listen to those being pushed into the shadows. Just like I once was. I don't need a title. I don't need a position. All I need to know is that my story is saving others from the fear of being forgotten, retaliated against, or silenced. And if someone asks me what remains after everything, I'll answer, a life unbowed, and a legacy no one can erase. Clara Simmons' story is a powerful reminder that integrity is not just a moral choice, it is true strength in a world built on deception. Fired just days before earning her retirement, she refused to stay silent and stood her ground with courage and undeniable evidence. In doing so, she not only restored her personal honor but also brought about systemic change. In real life, Clara reminds us, when you stand for the truth, you are never truly alone. What do you think about Clara's choice and her journey to justice? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to follow the channel for more real-life stories about family, integrity and courage. I still remember exactly how it felt standing in front of my parents' house in Bakersfield, holding a warm tray of cinnamon apple pie I had baked since 5 a.m. that morning to make it in time for Christmas dinner. It was Mom's old recipe. Hand-rolled crust, Granny Smith apples mixed with brown cinnamon and a touch of rum. That dish used to be her favorite, and I brought it every holiday as a habit, or maybe as a desperate effort to hold on to whatever was left of the word family. The door opened, and I stepped into a house filled with the sound of Christmas music from an old speaker, and the smell of roasted meat wafting from the kitchen. Mom was folding napkins on the table. Dad stood stirring cranberry sauce on the stove. No one smiled. No one said, "Merry Christmas, Autumn," like they did every other year. I hadn't even set the pie down when my father's voice cut through the air, dry as old timber. "Autumn, if you don't return that money, then turn around and leave this house immediately." I froze. For a split second, I thought he was making some twisted holiday joke. But there was no flicker in his eyes, no blinking, no chuckle to ease the blow. "What money?" I asked, my voice raspy with cold and disbelief. $42,000 from Mom's savings, my brother Kyle said from the dinner table. He wore a reindeer sweater, but his face held not a trace of humor. I turned to Mom. She said nothing, staring into the void. Her hands clutched the edge of the tablecloth so tight, her nails nearly dug through the fabric. "You think it was me?" I asked again, my voice rising. "You actually believe I stole from Mom?" No one answered. Not a single sympathetic glance. Not one word of defense. Even Rachel, my sister, who once cried in my arms during her divorce, sat silent, eyes fixed on her soup like a statue. I gripped the pie tray tighter. It suddenly felt like it weighed 20 pounds. The kitchen, once filled with laughter and the scent of butter, now felt like it could collapse at any moment. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, Autumn," Dad said coldly. "If you truly didn't do anything wrong, then prove it. Otherwise, don't come back." I set the pie down on the counter, slowly, as if placing something fragile and pointless. The tray made a dull metallic sound against the granite. Sharp, final. "I didn't take a cent from Mom," I said, "but thanks for showing me where I stand in this family." I turned around and walked to the door, my hands still freezing inside my leather gloves. No one followed. No one asked if I was okay. No one called my name. As I stepped outside, snow began to fall. I walked across the frozen driveway, each step pressing deeper into the realization that I no longer belonged in that house. At least not in their eyes. When I got into my car, turned the key and sat behind the wheel, my father's words echoed inside my head. "Return the money, or don't ever come back." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't slam the steering wheel like they do in the movies. I just started the engine, pulled my coat tight, and drove toward the highway. Leaving behind the house I used to call home, I pulled into the parking lot of a late-night cafe in Fresno, where a faded neon light cast streaks across my windshield as if trying to read my face. Drizzle mixed with snow clung to the side mirrors, and my hands trembled slightly as I turned off the engine. 36 years old, a financial director at a West Coast construction firm, and I had just been thrown out of my family's house, accused of stealing money. Inside, I ordered a double espresso. The purple-hailed cashier didn't ask why I collapsed into a corner seat, gripping the warm paper cup like a lifeline. Thankfully, she didn't say, "Merry Christmas." I had no idea how I would have reacted. The strangest part wasn't the accusation itself. It was how nobody said anything. Rachel, the same person who clung to me for 2 hours after her miscarriage last year, wouldn't look me in the eye. Mom, the one I wired $1,200 to help cover her medical bills back in April, hadn't opened her mouth. And Kyle, who usually argued with me, led the charge this time, proudly. No one asked, "Autumn, what's really going on?" No one questioned, "Are you sure it wasn't a mistake?" No one even considered the possibility I was innocent. Just silence. Complicity. A chill heavier than the sleet falling outside. I leaned my head against the wall, trying to remember the last time I truly felt like I belonged in that family. Maybe it was last year, when I drove across state lines, just to take Mom to her friend's wedding. Kyle? 3 years ago, I co-signed a short-term advance for him, $8,000, after he got fired from a startup for budget mismanagement. Rachel once stayed in my apartment for nearly 7 months, post-divorce. I never asked for anything back. Yet here they were, all on the same side against me. I scrolled through my phone, rereading a missed call from Dad 2 days earlier. That might have been the first sign. I had refused to send Kyle money for a new car, saying, 3 times is enough. Dad's reply? You don't know how to share. I thought he was just frustrated. I didn't realize it was a warning shot. A new message lit up the screen. Rachel, you need to understand that Mom's very hurt. Maybe you didn't mean to, but you let things get out of control. It'd be better if you cleared this up before it gets worse. I clenched the phone tighter. No, how are you? No trace of doubt in my innocence. Every word read like a verdict already passed. The only way to fix it now was to confess. The espresso had gone cold. I stood, left the cafe, and felt the wind whip through my coat collar like it was reminding me, no one's waiting for you. Back at my small apartment near the marina, neighbors' Christmas lights still twinkled despite the icy air. I didn't turn the lights on. I just stood there, staring at the artificial tree still packed away since early December. I had planned to decorate it with Mom and Rachel today. I had even prepared the silver ribbon, red bulbs, and the glass star we used to top the tree with when we were kids. Instead, I sat alone and opened my laptop. I tried logging into Mom's bank account, the one I had helped her set up, though I hadn't touched it since. Access denied. The account security settings had been changed 3 weeks earlier. I opened another window. My company email, not for work, but for a file I never thought I'd need personally. Signs of financial manipulation within a household. It was a training document I once wrote for new interns. Now, every line pointed directly at what was happening to me. I picked up a pen and wrote a single sentence on a blank sheet of paper. If they've all agreed in silence, I'll break it with the truth. That night, I didn't sleep. I made a list. Who had account access, the timeline of security changes, every time Kyle asked for money, every time Rachel borrowed my credit card, and every message or email I could cross-sectioner. I stayed awake until 3 a.m., lying still in the dark. Not because of the caffeine, but because the memories kept coming, like waves breaking over and over. Not loud, not violent, just steady, cold, and enough to shatter everything I once thought was solid. Maybe it didn't start at the Christmas dinner. Not when Dad told me to return the money or leave. It had started long before. I just didn't want to see it. When I got hired at Carson & Hill, Mom said, "Happy for you, but don't let your job make you forget to settle down." When I bought my first apartment with money I had saved, Kyle muttered, "Well, it's easy when you've got cash." Even on my birthday 3 years ago, when I took the whole family to a small Italian restaurant in Napa, Rachel had half joked, half snapped, "You only like places that require a platinum card to book." I used to laugh it off. I thought it was just what families did. Spoke fun, push limits, and then laugh it off with a hug. But looking back now, every scattered moment had pieced itself into a picture I could no longer ignore. I had outgrown them. And they didn't like it. Not because I flaunted my success, I never did. I didn't post vacation pictures, didn't brag about bonuses, didn't bring work into dinner. I was the one quietly covering meals, wrapping thoughtful gifts, calling Mom every Sunday night to check on her. Yet somehow, I became the suspicious one, for one simple reason. I was different. I stepped out onto the balcony. The cold mist clung to the steel railing in tiny droplets. The city was still. Streetlights cast a dull amber over sleepy rooftops. I took a deep breath, trying to shake the tightness in my chest. I remembered when Kyle lost his job. I was the one who called a friend at a logistics company to recommend him. They hired him. 3 months later, they let him go for misplacing 2 shipments worth nearly $10,000. I didn't blame him. I quietly paid the penalties to keep them from pressing charges. Kyle never knew. Rachel was always a little short. A bit of tuition for her interior design class, a bit of security deposit for her new place, a bit of prenatal expenses. I never said no. Each time I transferred the money, I sent the same simple text: "Take care of yourself." And what did I get in return? An accusation. Averted eyes. A cold message that read like I was a stranger. I went back inside and opened the drawer where I kept my records, a gray folder I'd held onto for 7 years. Inside, every dollar I had ever sent them. Wire transfers, receipts, invoices, messages, emails. Not because I wanted to collect it, but because I needed to remember how hard I tried. I picked up one page, $2,500 for Rachel back in March. Noted: prenatal checkup plus initial expenses. I remembered her saying, "I'll pay you back as soon as I'm stable." 6 months later, she bought a new leather couch and posted it proudly on Facebook. Never mentioned the money again. An email from Mom resurfaced in my mind. Sent at 2 a.m. after Dad had a blood pressure scare? Autumn, I'm sorry to ask again, but the insurance hasn't cleared yet, and I don't know where else to turn for the $3,000. I know you're busy, but you're all I've got. I wired the money within 2 hours. Mom replied with a single smiling emoji. I looked around my apartment. No Christmas presents, no tree, no music. But there was one truth shining clearly in the silence. I owed them nothing. Not money, not affection, not blind loyalty. And if they chose to shut me out of their family, I would go. But I would take the truth with me. I opened my laptop, logged into the remote access monitoring tool our firm had been testing. I entered my parents' home address, narrowed the timeline to when the withdrawals happened, and requested a full trace of all device access logs. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The coffee machine in the company kitchen hadn't even finished brewing, but I didn't have time to wait. I needed the servers. I needed access to internal systems. And more than anything, I needed to start investigating, not as a daughter who'd been rejected by her family, but as a professional who knew how to uncover financial truth. I sat at my desk and logged into Carson & Hill's risk analysis platform. For the past 2 months, I had been leading a project detecting fraudulent transactions in a network of trust funds, where patterns were often hidden behind proxy accounts, internal transfers, or third-party device logins. Ironically, the same techniques now mirrored what was happening with my mother's savings account. I began with a simple query: any unusual activity recorded from my parents' home IP address, spanning from November 10th through Christmas Eve. The data downloaded in minutes. What I saw made my skin crawl. 3 logins to Mom's savings account on November 13th, 18th, and 21st, all came from a new device, a Samsung Galaxy Tab using the Chrome browser, not the old iPad I had originally helped her set up. The IP address matched the home Wi-Fi. But the device registration? It was tied to a Gmail account, Kyle Finance 89. I froze, heart pounding. That email address had come up nearly a year ago, when Kyle tried to pitch investors on a personal budget app he never managed to build. I remembered because I was the one who told him to stop pitching without a working MVP. I kept digging. 3 separate transactions, each withdrawal between $14,000 and $15,000. Just under the federal threshold for mandatory reporting. This wasn't a mistake. It was calculated. Following the login history, I found a password change confirmation from the bank, dated November 12th, sent to an email I had never seen linked to Mom's account. Rachel.mainstudio@gmail.com. I clenched the mouse. Rachel had used that same address to open an Etsy shop last year. She had once proudly told me she was about to launch a canvas art store. Now that email was set as the recovery contact for Mom's bank account. I straightened up and opened another window, this time accessing our user identity mapping tool, which linked devices to physical locations based on IP logs. The results sent a chill down my spine. 4 login sessions traced. 2 from the upstairs bedroom, Kyle's room, and 2 from the basement studio Rachel had converted into a workspace. All occurred during hours when Mom was away at medical appointments. I knew that, because I was the one who drove her. They hadn't just taken the money, they had waited, coordinated, and used my own acts of care as the perfect cover. I pulled up Google Photos, locating a picture I had taken the day I took Mom to the clinic. She was seated beside me in the car, holding a bottle of water and her worn Bible. The photo had GPS coordinates, exactly 10 miles from the house. The timestamp read, 8:30 a.m. November. I noted everything, compiled it into a file I titled, Chrono, the Redemption Dossier. Not to threaten, not to retaliate, but to make sure that when I faced them again, the truth would be undeniable, impossible to twist or ignore. Part of me still couldn't believe I was doing this, investigating my own family. It felt like taking on a financial crime ring. But I knew this much: if I stayed silent, they would keep building a version of events that benefited them. And next time, the victim might not be me. It might be Mom. I printed all the documents, laminated the most critical evidence, and placed it inside the same black folder I used for board presentations. That afternoon, I called the one person I still trusted. Mr. Walter, an independent legal advisor who had once helped our firm through a financial misconduct case 3 years prior. I laid everything out. Sent the full file. Then I asked him one question. If I want to bring the truth to light without tearing the family apart, is there any way to do that? He paused for a long while, then answered slowly. Autumn, sometimes the truth doesn't destroy a family, it just reveals what they've been hiding all along. 3 days later, I received a reply from the Internal Surveillance Unit at Atlantic First Bank, where my mother held her savings account. I had submitted a request as her authorized financial advisor, supported by the document she had signed earlier that year. Attached were 3 video files from the Fresno West branch's security cameras, along with a certified transaction report. I sat alone in a small meeting room on the 16th floor, white light glowing across the screen as the first video began to play. November 13th. A woman in a beanie, dark sunglasses, and a surgical mask entered the branch at 11:47 a.m. She pulled a white envelope from her handbag, presented an ID, signed a form, and walked away with a stack of cash. I zoomed in on the frame at second 35. She lowered her mask to speak with the teller. Sharp jawline. A mole near the left corner of her lips. No doubt about it. Rachel. I swallowed hard and fast-forward to the second clip. November 18th. A man in a brown coat with a close haircut walked in at 2 p.m. Same process, ID, documents, signature. But this time, no mask. No attempt to disguise himself. He was calm, joking with the teller like he owned the account. Kyle. The third video made my skin crawl. November 23rd. Rachel again. Same beanie. Same furtive manner. But this time, she scribbled on the form in a hurry, misspelling Mom's name. Under the harsh light of the counter, her hand trembled as she signed. I shut the video and opened the signature comparison file sent by the bank. All 3 withdrawal slips were signed in the same slanted handwriting, with the distinctive hook in the letter W. Identical to a sticky note Rachel had once left on Mom's fridge. "Don't forget your doctor's appointment at 3, R." I printed the clearest stills, annotated timestamps, and cross-checked them with Mom's phone GPS data, still synced to the Apple Health system I had installed for her last year. Each withdrawal took place while she was at different medical clinics. They hadn't just forged her signature. They had used the exact times I was driving Mom to her appointments, turning my care into the perfect alibi. I sent all the evidence to Mr. Walter, the attorney, with a note. Video footage, timestamps and GPS coordinates. Undeniable proof. The bank also provided copies of the withdrawal forms, signed, ID matched, and verified. One transaction even listed Kyle's own phone number as the contact. No one questioned it, since the account belonged to a well-known elderly client. I pushed back from the table, standing to look through the window at the parking lot below. January wind tilted the slender palm trees. I stood there, unmoved. Not angry. Not shaken. Just cold. I had everything I needed. The only question left was, what did they think I'd do with the truth? That evening, I drove to the Millview suburbs, where my parents lived in their terracotta-roofed house beneath the old oak tree. I didn't knock. I parked 2 blocks away, watching the living room lights still on. I pictured Kyle with his feet on the coffee table, Rachel steeping tea in the kitchen, and Mom, still believing her eldest daughter had betrayed her. From the back seat, I retrieved the black folder, organized chronologically. 3 transactions, 3 videos, 3 handwriting samples, and the access logs showing IP data tied to devices that weren't mine. I didn't text, didn't call. I simply wrote one line on the front of the folder. I didn't take the money. But I will take back the truth. Then I placed it gently at the front door, rang the bell, and walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't wait. I returned to the house in Millview on Sunday morning, 3 days after leaving the folder at the doorstep. Winter sunlight filtered through the tall oak trees, casting broken beams across the stone steps. I used to walk up those steps feeling like a daughter coming home. But today, every footstep was a quiet declaration. I was no longer someone they could dismiss. The door opened after my second knock. It was Mom. She wore a gray wool robe, hair unbrushed. Her face looked like she hadn't slept in 3 nights. Her eyes met mine hesitantly, like she wanted to speak, but didn't know where to start. "Can I come in?" I asked calmly. She stepped aside without a word. Kyle was on the sofa, legs propped up on the coffee table, phone in hand. When he saw me, he sprang to his feet, his expression shifting instantly. Rachel stepped out from the kitchen holding a cup of tea. She froze when our eyes met. Dad, who usually took a Sunday morning walk around the neighborhood park, wasn't back yet. No one offered me a seat. I didn't need one. I placed the document case on the coffee table and unlocked it. No rush, no noise. Every motion was deliberate. I pulled out 3 printed security camera stills and laid them neatly on the wooden surface. The soft music from the kitchen radio came to a sudden stop. Rachel set her teacup down so quietly the porcelain didn't make a sound. "We need to talk," I began. "About the $42,000 you accused me of taking." Kyle crossed his arms, trying to stay composed. "We've already said what we had to, Autumn. No one wanted this, but all the evidence pointed to you." "Did it?" I said with a soft laugh. "Here's Rachel at Atlantic First on November 13th. Here's Kyle on the 18th. And the third time, Rachel again on the 21st. I have the full videos, if you'd like to watch them." Rachel started to protest, but I raised my hand. I didn't need excuses. The withdrawal forms were all signed. I sent them to the law office for verification. They matched the handwriting to a note you left on Mom's fridge last month, Rachel. As for the recovery email and phone number, both were registered from this house's IP address, on a device labeled Kyle's tablet. Mom stood frozen, clutching the hem of her robe. And Mom, I turned to her, my tone softer. Do you remember the day I took you to Valley Medical? I snapped a photo of us in the car, planning to post it later. That picture has GPS data. It confirms where we were while Kyle was logging into your account from this house to change the security settings. She gasped, raising her hand to her mouth. I sat across from all three, resting my hand lightly on the folder. Way? I asked, not raising my voice. Why choose this way? If you needed money, I could have helped. I have helped. But this time, you didn't just take the money. You took my trust. Something no amount of money can buy back. Rachel looked down, her lips pressed tight. Kyle stayed silent. Mom's voice trembled as she finally spoke. I didn't know. They said it was a mistake you made when setting things up. Then the money disappeared. I believed them. I don't understand that tech stuff. No one asked me, I said slowly. No one gave me a chance to explain. Dad told me not to come back unless I returned the money. Rachel sent a message like I was dangerous. And you, Mom? You stayed silent. The silence returned. But this time, it wasn't complicity. It was consequence. I stood and gathered the folder, neatly stacking the pages but not putting them away. I didn't come to reclaim the money. I came to put the truth back where it belongs. If anyone has something to say, now is the time. The air in the living room remained heavy after I gave them one last chance to speak, but instead of an apology, all I received were averted gazes and broken phrases clinging to anything but the truth laid bare on the table. Kyle spoke first. His voice was calm but his eyes betrayed unease. You always act like you're better than everyone else, coming home like you're handing out gifts, like we should all be grateful you exist. You don't get it. It's not easy living in your shadow for 30 years. I looked at him. Not with anger or contempt, just emptiness. I don't live to cast shadows, I work because I have to take care of myself. If my effort makes you feel threatened, that's your issue, not my fault. Rachel still had her head down, but at my words she looked up. Eyes red, but her mouth curled bitterly. You always had everything: scholarships, a great job, a downtown apartment, a successful boyfriend. What about me? Mom and Dad always compared us. I just wanted to feel like I mattered too. And stealing was how you chose to matter? I asked, voice low but crystal clear. You didn't want to live in my shadow, so you made me the thief? Rachel didn't answer. She turned away. Mom stood motionless, clutching her robe as if holding together something unraveling inside. Dad entered in the middle of the tension, set his helmet on the shelf, and asked softly, "What's going on here?" Mom turned to him, slowly. Autumn proved she didn't take the money. He looked at me, then down at the folder still open on the table. Color-printed photos, matching signatures, footage from the security cameras. For a brief second, I saw something in his eyes that resembled regret. But it vanished faster than a blink. So what do you want now? He asked. You want us all to kneel and apologize? I smiled, for the first time that morning. Not out of joy, but because I finally understood how blurred our boundaries had become. I don't want apologies. I don't need redemption. I just want one thing clear. From today on, our relationship won't be what it used to be. I walked to the table, collected the documents, carefully placing each sheet into the leather folder. No one has the right to question my integrity without proof. No one gets to assume I'll come in and fix their mess, and no one gets to call my name when they need money, only to fall silent once they're done using me. No one reacted. Not a word broke the silence. I looked at Mom, my voice softer but steady. You can call me if you need someone to listen, not if you just need a walking wallet. I'll answer. But if you stayed silent when they blamed me without asking a single question, then I'll stay silent too. I turned to Kyle and Rachel. You don't owe me explanations. I'm not obligated to forgive, but I have every right to walk away from this cycle. I walked to the door. This time, no one stopped me. Mom whispered my name. Barely audible. But I didn't pause. Before I closed the gray wooden door, I said one final thing. Thought I lost a family I belonged to. But now I know, I didn't lose anything. I just found myself. The door shut behind me, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty for walking away. I wasn't running. I was simply leaving. As anyone should, when trust has been traded for convenience. 2 months after the final confrontation with my family, I stood on a small platform inside the community room at the Bakersfield Public Library. In front of me were about 10 people, mostly older women, a few silver-haired men, and a young woman sitting beside her grandmother. On the whiteboard behind me, written in bold marker, "Understand to protect your personal finances." I was no longer the Autumn who used to drive 3 hours home every holiday, hoping to be called the proud daughter. I no longer checked my phone on Sundays to see if Mom had messaged. I no longer kept Kyle or Rachel's numbers in my contacts. Now, I kept them exactly where they chose to be. I had started a small group called Guardian Ledger, where I hosted free workshops on managing personal finances, avoiding banking scams, and protecting digital accounts, especially for older adults. The skills my family once mocked as out of touch had now become a shield for dozens of people against manipulation. At the first session, 76-year-old Ruth shared that her nephew nearly convinced her to transfer over $6,000 into an untraceable digital wallet, claiming he was helping her switch to online banking. She trembled recalling it, but laughed by the time I showed her how to enable two-factor authentication. That's when I realized, my strength didn't come from revenge, it came from turning what I knew into protection for others. I still worked at Carson and Hill, but on Saturdays I taught. On Sundays, I volunteered at a local legal aid circle. No media, no spotlights, just small coffee gatherings, where people who'd been betrayed by family could speak without fear of judgment. I never went back to the house in Millview. I didn't restart any conversations. Mom called 3 times. Twice I didn't answer, once I replied, "I'm doing fine, but I need space." No reply followed. One morning in early April, I received a handwritten letter. Cream-colored envelope, the handwriting unmistakable. Mom's. Inside was a single old photograph. Me, Kyle, and Rachel, sitting on the front porch as kids. I held a plastic trumpet. Rachel wore a princess dress. Kyle grinned, face smeared with birthday cake. Below the photo, written in blue ink, "We were wrong. But now I see. You deserve something better." I didn't cry. I didn't feel relief. I just folded the letter and placed it in a wooden memory box on my bookshelf. I didn't need another admission to know I had chosen the right path. I had let go, not out of weakness, but because I deserved a life where I didn't have to clear my name in my own family. One Saturday afternoon after class, Ruth took my hand and said, "I wish you were my daughter." I gently squeezed her hand and smiled. I can't replace anyone, but I can turn pain into something good. As I left the library, spring sunlight stretched long across the sidewalk. A little boy ran past holding a sandwich, followed by a young mother calling after him with a smile. None of them knew who I was. And they didn't have to. They simply saw a woman passing by. Ordinary, composed, and free. Free from expectations, free from forced obligations, free from hugs with strings attached. And to me, that's the truest definition of family. Not the place you're required to belong to, but the place where you're allowed to be yourself, even if that means walking there alone. Autumn's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes, the people we love most can hurt us the deepest. But instead of drowning in pain and anger, she turned that loss into purpose, and that betrayal into meaningful action. In real life, anyone can find themselves misunderstood or cast aside by those who were supposed to protect them. But like Autumn did, you don't need to reclaim validation. You only need to stand in your truth and keep walking forward. What do you think of Autumn's decision? Would you have the courage to do the same? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about family and life. The soft chime of crystal echoed as Logan, my older brother, clinked his red wine glass against my father Richard's. The walnut-paneled dining room gleamed under a chandelier, while I sat quietly, picking at my untouched plate of cod, stomach tightening with the dread of what was coming. To success. And to those who know how to make it happen. Logan grinned, his teeth blindingly white, like a toothpaste commercial, seated beside his wife Vanessa. My father, a man who carried the arrogance of an older generation, raised his Bordeaux with a satisfied nod. Logan just closed a real estate deal worth $18 million, his second this quarter. He truly is the gem of this family. I forced a smile, glancing at my mother, Helen, the only person at the table who occasionally looked at me with a flicker of guilt, yet never spoke up. As usual, no one asked me anything. No one ever did. But this time Vanessa broke the pattern. So what about you, Aurora, that documentary about, was it urban trash? More specifically, it's about how the local government covered up data on toxic waste in the town of Harrison, I replied, my voice calmer than I felt. Logan snorted, leaning back in his chair like he'd just heard a recycled joke. Oh wow, riveting. Are you planning to dump garbage footage on Netflix? At least I'm not investing in homes built on contaminated land, Logan. My father set his wineglass down with a sharp clink. He turned toward me, eyes cold as steel. So you're clinging to that silly camera work again. When will you grow up and get a real job? I kept my composure, my fingers clenched around the fork. I'm working on a major project. This is not some side hobby. Right. Just like that participation trophy last year. Huh. Logan chimed in. You got to speak for 3 whole minutes on environmental awareness at what? A half-empty forum? The Conference on Corporate Accountability, I replied, my voice beginning to shake. Sure, probably as packed as a 3rd-grade parent meeting. Logan snickered, earning a half-hearted kick from Vanessa under the table. I'm investigating a corporation called Huxley Chemicals, I said, louder now. They're quietly dumping waste near residential areas. 3 people have developed leukemia in the past year. All living within a few blocks. Silence. After 3 seconds, my father folded his arms, staring at me like I was a foreign object in his house. Huxley is a client of the family's law firm. Are you saying you've been filming our clients? With your amateur camera and whatever you're calling evidence? It's the truth. I have documents. Witnesses? Witnesses? Logan burst out laughing. Are you dragging in people wearing hazmat suits to give TED Talks? I'm doing what needs to be done, I snapped, standing up. The water glass toppled, spreading slowly across the pristine white tablecloth, like a slow-motion spill. Sit down, my father's voice dropped to that dangerously quiet tone. No. I won't sit here and pretend this is a respectable family while you and Logan defend people who are poisoning entire neighborhoods. What is this all for, Aurora? Logan rose too, now face to face with me. Just to be noticed? Because no one respects your so-called career? I stepped back, gripping my bag. Let me make this clear, I said, eyes locked on every person in the room. I don't need your validation. But you will all face the truth, and this time, every word, every act, will be documented. You're just dragging the whole family through the mud, my father growled. No. I'm bringing light into the places you've buried in darkness for far too long. I opened the door, the creak echoing through the frozen silence of the room. My mother's voice chased me weakly from behind. Aurora, wait. I left my father's estate and drove straight to my tiny apartment in South Portland, the place I rented solely for editing footage and sleeping on a barely wide enough bed. Only one thought echoed in my head. Huxley Chemicals had to be exposed. I called the one person I could trust. Eliza Hart, my best friend from college and now a freelance investigative journalist. What's going on? You never call after 9 p.m. Her concerned voice came through. Remember when I told you about Huxley chemicals? I think I found the one thread no one dares to pull. Go on. I quickly filled her in on what had happened during that dinner. How my family's law firm, founded by my father, represented Huxley, and how I was certain they knew exactly what was being hidden. I need your old contacts. TV anchors, editors, EPA leads, anyone, I said, my heart pounding. I'm not backing down this time. 3 days later, we met at a quiet cafe near Washington Park. Eliza brought her laptop, her scribbled notepads, and a list of contacts so detailed I knew I was heading into dangerous territory. Rory, there's someone you need to meet. He used to work at Herald Weekly. Now he's an independent producer. Exposed that oxycodone scandal back in 2018. Name's Julian Price. That afternoon I met Julian in a repurposed basement studio of a red brick building, near the Pearl District. He was in his early 40s, wore a canvas jacket, and had the kind of eyes that had seen too much truth to ever fully rest. After watching the footage I'd shot in Harrison, discolored creeks, bare patches of dead land, and a grieving father talking about his son's sudden death, Julian shut his laptop. You've got substance, but it needs something more. Something people can't ignore. What do you mean? You need fire. Anger. Personal stake. If people can't feel you in the story, it'll vanish into the noise of 1,000 other scandals. I froze. He was right. I had spent years trying to stay neutral, to gain respect, but they never respected me. Not once. Huxley's got plants in Oregon, New Mexico, Kansas, and South Carolina. Think Harrison's a one-off? Not even close. I've got a contact at the EPA, you need to talk to her. The contact was Sarah Millen, from the Environmental Compliance Division. I called her the next morning. The call lasted just 20 minutes, but it opened an entirely new layer to the investigation. We've recorded leukemia rates in the area around Huxley's plant that are 3.4 times higher than the national average, Sarah said. But every time we get close to releasing it, the evidence disappears. Or deletes it. I can't say for sure, but strangely their legal team always shows up just before any public hearing, fully armed with documents to dismantle every complaint. I asked for the name of the law firm. My heart stopped when she answered. Wallace and Green, LLP. My father's firm. I ended the call and stood frozen in my apartment, the late afternoon light cutting across the mess of open folders and highlighters. The pieces were aligning. Logan, my brother, was currently handling a real estate deal out in eastern Idaho, near one of the suspected dump zones. My father was a major shareholder in the firm that defended Huxley. They had blocked at least 4 investigations in the past 10 years. I turned on the camera, not to document victims, this time. March 12th. My name is Aurora Wallace. I'm a documentary filmmaker and daughter of Richard Wallace, senior partner at Wallace and Green. Today, I begin documenting how a wealthy family has used its power to shield a corporation, poisoning the very communities it pretends to serve. The camera kept rolling as I pulled an old hard drive from my desk drawer. It contained a 2-month-old interview with a former Huxley employee. He'd chosen to remain anonymous but had detailed how barrels of unidentified liquids were buried just 800 feet from a school. I called Julian. I'm ready. Then get ready, Aurora. His voice was lower now. Because once this starts, there's no going back. 3 days later, while editing the interview with a former Huxley employee at Julian's studio, my phone buzzed. The call came from an unknown number. I hesitated, then picked up. Aurora? It's me, Carla. I held my breath. Carla? Logan's wife? Had never called me before. She usually avoided any interaction outside family gatherings. I only have a few minutes, so listen carefully, she whispered, voice tight with anxiety. I work in Huxley's accounting department. I found something that doesn't add up. What is it exactly? There's a recurring series of monthly wire transfers from Huxley to shell companies in Belize and Singapore. Over $12 million in less than a year. When I asked my manager about it, he told me not to interfere with things outside my scope. Carla, I need those records if you can. I've backed them up on a USB drive, but I can't give it to you at home, Logan would notice. Meet me after work at Copper and Pine, on 6th Street. 5:30 p.m. sharp. At the scheduled time, Carla arrived looking pale and exhausted. She didn't order anything. She just slid a silver USB drive into the pocket of my coat, hands trembling. I'm pregnant, she said, her hand resting on her stomach. And our apartment is less than half a mile from the Huxley plant. I can't stay silent anymore. Have you told Logan? Knows. And he warned me not to destabilize the balance. Carla stood, leaving her bill unpaid, and whispered before heading out. Be careful, I think someone's been watching me. That night, when I opened the USB, my screen lit up with a massive spreadsheet. Banking transactions, shady payrolls, encrypted shipping charges, and internal meeting notes. One name repeated again and again. Crown Coast Shipping, LLC. Registered in Louisiana, but the final consignee address was in Malaysia. As I took notes and backed everything up to a secure hard drive, a new anonymous email popped up in the corner of the screen. Subject: You're asking the wrong people. Body: If you want the truth, go to 438 Blackridge Street, 3rd floor, last room. Come alone. Thursday, 3 p.m. I didn't respond. But the next morning, I called Julian. I'm going. If I don't call you by 4, send everything we have to RIA and the EPA. Aurora, this could be a setup. Maybe. Or it could be the missing piece. 2 days later, I stood outside a crumbling building with shattered windows and weeds swallowing the stone steps. Not a soul in sight. I gripped my camera tight and stepped inside. The 3rd floor was eerily silent, except for the last room at the end of the hall, glowing faintly. I pushed the door open. A man in his 50s sat behind a scarred wooden desk. Shoulders slumped like the weight of a world sat on him. He looked up, eyes deep and tired, voice raspy. You're Richard Wallace's daughter? I'm here to investigate Huxley, not to talk about my father. They're the same thing, he sighed. I used to be operations supervisor at Huxley's Savannah facility for 8 years. Until I found this. He slid a pile of yellowed documents toward me. Purchase orders. Huge shipments of hazardous chemicals, routed from a partner company in China to U.S. ports, then dispersed to 4 states, via Crown Coast Shipping. They're not just dumping, they're importing industrial waste from overseas to process here. It's cheaper in Asia, and the laws are looser. They're turning the U.S. into a paid dumping ground? He nodded grimly. Each barrel is labeled as recyclable materials, but it's really untreated toxic compounds. I reported it to upper management. The next week, my wife was diagnosed with late-stage ovarian cancer. A month later, I was demoted. So that's why you called me. Because I'm running out of time, and you're the only one reckless enough to dig through this garbage. Before I could ask more, a door slammed on the floor below. Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs. He whispered quickly. Use the back exit, now, and don't trust anyone, especially your family. I ran. Didn't look back. The next morning, I received news. He had died of a heart attack in his sleep. No autopsy was conducted. I stared at my computer screen. The video was still playing. His voice steady. Eyes heavy. We can't call this an accident. We can't call it carelessness. This is a system. I clicked Save Draft. My heart beat faster than it ever had before. Someone had just confirmed I had touched the most dangerous nerve in the whole truth. I was editing the video footage from the abandoned building when the doorbell rang. Once. Then again. Loud. Urgent. My heart tightened. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole. Logan. My brother, who hadn't visited me once in the 3 years I'd lived in this apartment, was now standing there in a wrinkled shirt, tie half untied, his expression oddly strained. I cracked the door, chain still in place. What do you want? We need to talk. About Huxley, about what you're doing. Not here. Aurora, I didn't come to fight, but if you don't stop, this won't just be a legal mess. I looked him straight in the eyes. Is that a threat? No. I'm trying to save you. I unchained the door and let him in. His eyes scanned the room. Camera gear, stacks of documents. The laptop screen paused mid-ed. He sank into the armchair, ran a hand over his face, like he'd aged a decade overnight. Carla told you everything, didn't she? I asked, keeping just enough distance to read every flicker on his face. She told me, enough. The fake payrolls, the Crown Coast wire transfers. Do you have any idea how deep this goes? I do. That's why I'm not stopping. Logan sighed, pulled out his phone, tapped around, and held it up. A PDF filled the screen. Title: Internal Memo. The Executive Board of Huxley Holdings, Inc. I scanned it and froze. Richard Wallace sits on the board? Not just that, Logan said quietly. He's a strategic shareholder since 2011. I stepped back. It felt like the floor cracked under my feet. Dad knew. He knew everything. And this whole time he signed off on every legal defense for Huxley, buried every investigation, paved the way for every merger, including the Nexen logistics deal I'm overseeing, Logan finished. I stared at him. So why are you here? To beg me? Or to buy me off? Logan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice heavy. Aurora, I know you think you're doing the right thing, and part of me believes you are. But this isn't just some documentary. This is our family. Our careers, hundreds of employees. Mom, if you go public, it all goes down. And if I stay silent, how many families keep living next to poison, waiting to die? I get that. But you don't understand the fallout. There are people who'll do anything to keep this buried. They already have. The man I met 3 days ago? Mr. Carson, former operations supervisor. He just died in his sleep. But he had no history of heart problems. Logan looked down, silent. I stepped closer, my voice low and firm. I'm going public. Every file, every interview. If you came to stop me, go back and tell Dad to start packing. Logan stood, eyes bloodshot. You're leaving us no choice. No, Logan, you made your choice a long time ago. He walked to the door, paused before leaving. You've got 48 hours. After that, don't expect negotiations. The door slammed shut. I turned to the screen, where footage of barrels being moved at night played beside interviews, silent sobs, and my father shaking hands with Huxley's CEO at a gala 2 years ago. Press photo. Now evidence. I opened my backup software, plugged in another external drive, sent one copy to Julian, one to Eliza, and one to an encrypted cloud server. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. You should be careful what you're about to broadcast. Some people don't forgive. I deleted the message. And hit render full video. I didn't need their forgiveness. I needed the truth to be seen. Carla and I sat across from each other in my cluttered apartment, surrounded by hard drives, HDMI cables, and stacks of freshly printed documents. It was already 2 a.m., but we kept editing. Eyes stinging from the screen's light, hands trembling with exhaustion. We knew we were going up against a giant, and we only had one shot to strike the core. Start with Mr. Carson, I said. His voice is haunting enough to hook them from the first second. What about the internal documents? Carla asked, sliding over a list of encrypted emails. Right after the victims. I want people to see the consequences first, before they see the ones who caused them. Aurora, she hesitated. Logan knows I helped you. I turned to her. She didn't need to say more, her eyes already betrayed the fear. He won't touch you, not now, not after what's coming. She nodded and pulled out her phone. I've scheduled the full dump of these files to 3 major newsrooms. 8:30 tomorrow night, 1 tap if anything happens. I stared at her, overwhelmed with a silent kind of gratitude. The next morning, I called Julian to finalize the broadcast plan. He had already secured a local TV outlet and arranged simultaneous live streaming to international platforms. Everything would go public at exactly 8:30, right when the family dinner started. At 7:45 p.m. sharp, I parked outside my father's mansion. Every light was on, a black limousine with the gold-plated Huxley logo shimmered near the steps. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of grilled steak, red wine and expensive cologne. I stepped in, wearing a charcoal coat, hair pulled into a clean bun, makeup just enough to avoid the usual remarks about me looking unprofessional. My father Richard stood near the fireplace with a brandy glass, speaking to a silver-haired man I recognized immediately, Huxley's CEO. "Aurora," my father called out, raising his glass. "Didn't expect you to show. Perfect timing." I nodded without shaking hands. A server handed me a drink. Logan approached, whispering in my ear. "There's still time to walk away." "It's too late," I replied, eyes flicking toward the antique clock. 8:27. The dining room was meticulously arranged. Silver candles, silk napkins, and crystal glassware. Logan's seat was placed beside the CEO. My father lifted his glass. "Before we dine, a quick toast," he announced proudly. "Tonight is special. After over a decade at Wallace & Green, Logan will officially assume the role of National Legal Director at Huxley Chemicals." Applause erupted. Logan offered a stiff smile, but his eyes darted toward me, nervous. 8:30. My phone buzzed softly, inside my coat. I set my glass down and stood. "If I may," I said, loud enough for the room to fall still. "I have a little announcement too." My father frowned. "Aurora, now is not the time." "This is the perfect time," I said evenly, "because right now, a documentary I've worked on for the past 6 months is airing nationwide." Silence slammed into the room. "It's called The Mask of Huxley," I continued. "It's about a chemical corporation that has quietly destroyed the health of thousands of Americans for over a decade. And it names the people who helped them evade justice." "What are you talking about?" The CEO's voice turned icy. I pulled a remote from my pocket and pressed a button. The TV mounted above the mantel lit up. Faces turned as Mr. Carson's voice filled the room. I saw them bury those barrels less than a few hundred feet from a preschool. 1 minute, 2 minutes. No one said a word. My mother gasped, hand over her mouth. Carla quietly slipped out toward the kitchen, avoiding Logan's stare. Then it happened. The screen showed Richard Wallace, signing contracts, shaking hands, appearing in Huxley boardroom documents. My father's chair screeched back. "Turn it off," he barked. "Aurora, you have no idea what you've just done." I stood tall. "I know exactly what I've done, and this time everyone will see it. No edits, no filters, just truth." A notification dinged on Logan's phone. He checked it and went pale. I turned to him, calm. "I've sent every file to 3 national news outlets, and a full copy to the Environmental Protection Agency. From this moment on, no one's burying this truth again." Outside, red and blue lights flashed. Through the window, a black SUV with a federal seal rolled to a stop at the gate. Logan muttered, nearly inaudible, "We're screwed." I lifted my untouched wine glass, took a slow sip, then looked my father in the eye. "Congratulations, Dad, looks like the light finally found its way in." The sound of sirens echoed beyond the gate. Blue and red lights sliced through the silk curtains, casting sharp reflections onto my father's pale face. His hand trembled against the oak table, eyes still fixed on the TV screen where the headline scrolled relentlessly. "Exclusive, Huxley Corporation under investigation for major environmental violations." Everyone in the room stood frozen, as if carved in stone. The front door burst open. FBI, everyone remain where you are. 7 agents entered, bringing with them a wave of cold air, sidearms holstered, expressions unreadable. Behind them came 2 officials from the Environmental Protection Agency, followed by someone I instantly recognized. Federal Agent Lisa McCarthy, the same one I'd sent documents to weeks ago. Richard Wallace, you are under arrest for conspiracy, financial fraud, and obstruction of a federal investigation, she stated, then turned toward Huxley's CEO. Thomas Brennan, you are charged with violating the Clean Air Act, conspiracy to illegally transport industrial waste, and submitting false information to federal authorities. My father didn't move. You're making a grave mistake, he said, voice trembling. I have an attorney. We know, Mr. Wallace, that's why we obtained an expanded search warrant. McCarthy replied, handing over a red-stamped document. 2 agents moved toward Logan, who stood motionless beside his chair, his phone slipping from his hand onto the floor. Logan Wallace, you will be questioned regarding your role in legalizing transactions with offshore shell companies, and whether you were involved in the destruction of related evidence. I didn't know anything. I just signed off under my father's instruction. Logan blurted, panic rising in his voice. I was never directly involved in those accounts. But you knew, and you still signed, I said from behind him, voice colder than the marble floor beneath us. You chose silence, just like he did. The 2 men were cuffed and escorted out. Brennan followed, face pale, completely silent. All 3 were led out the front door, flashlights flickering as waiting news cameras captured every second. The story had broken faster than I'd expected. A heavy silence descended on the dining room. My mother Helen slowly stood, her face no longer held its usual composure. Instead she looked hollow. Shaken. The kind of pain that had no name. Aurora. Her voice was hoarse. Is it all true? I nodded. I didn't need to say anything more. She covered her mouth with her hand, as if holding back something rising from the pit of her soul. All these years I saw the signs, she whispered. The files he brought home, the nights he locked himself in his office for hours. But I never asked. I told myself it was just work stress. I stayed silent because I was afraid the truth would destroy the image of our family I clung to. I stepped closer. She took my hand, her eyes red and glassy. I'm sorry for not standing beside you, for letting you fight this alone for so long. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't hurt, but because I'd run out of tears long ago. Do you see now? I said softly. What they called stability, status, and pride was built on the suffering and death of others. She pulled me into an embrace. For the first time in years, not out of duty, not for appearances, but out of something real. Maternal. Human. Carla stepped out from the kitchen, cradling her pregnant belly. She looked at me, then nodded gently. We had done what no one else dared, and no matter the cost, it had been the only right thing to do. Outside, helicopter rotors still churned the air. News outlets refreshed updates by the minute. I stepped onto the porch, the strobe of lights painting the Oregon night in sharp white flashes. A reporter stepped forward, mic extended. Mrs. Wallace, do you have anything to say to the public, to your family? I looked directly into the lens, voice steady. I didn't destroy my family. I just tore off the mask they wore for too long. No one should be above accountability. Not even someone named Wallace. Behind me, my mother stepped outside, stood beside me, and quietly took my hand. And this time, she didn't let go. 3 days after the media explosion and the full release of the documents, I received a short text just before noon. Are you home? I need to talk, Logan. I didn't respond. But an hour later he was standing at my apartment door. No tie, wrinkled shirt, freshly shaven, with a few red nicks still on his jaw. In his hand was a thin envelope. I opened the door. He said nothing, just stepped inside and sank into the couch like he hadn't slept in days. The bank accounts are frozen. Properties too. All the investments, under investigation. I can't even withdraw enough to pay my own lawyer. I didn't say anything. He looked at me, and the arrogance I once knew was gone from his eyes. Arla. She's staying with her parents. They don't want her involved in this. And Mom. She's staying with me. I cut in. At least until the trial is over. Logan sat quietly for a moment, then handed me the envelope. First round of deposition notes. I've confessed to everything, my part in the offshore transactions, the Crown Coast funneling, the deals I let pass without question. The FBI wants me to cooperate in exchange for leniency. I skimmed the pages. His signature was fresh, likely signed that very morning. Why show me this? Because I know you didn't do this for revenge. You did it so people would live with truth. I didn't listen then. But now? I'll do my part. I nodded, neither forgiving nor rejecting, because for people like him, redemption isn't in words. It's in what comes next. That afternoon, my mother came home from meeting with her lawyer. She was no longer the quiet woman who lived in my father's shadow. Every step she took now had intent. Aurora, she said as she walked through the door. I filed a motion to testify. As a voluntary witness, not to excuse anything, but to confirm what you said is true. I turned to her. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do, she cut in. I've been silent too long. This time, I want to stand in front of the court and say, I saw, I knew, but I didn't act, and I was wrong. Tears welled in my eyes, but I turned away. I didn't want her to see me break now. 3 days later, I visited the Oregon Federal Prison, my first time seeing my father since his arrest. The visitation room reeked of disinfectant. The air felt suspended. Behind thick glass, Richard Wallace looked smaller than ever. His gray prison uniform hung loose on the man who once prided himself on tailored suits. I sat and picked up the phone. He did the same on his end. Thank you for coming, he said, voice dry and hoarse. I didn't come to forgive, I said bluntly. I came to hear the truth. He nodded, eyes meeting mine. I was wrong, not just because of greed. I'd convinced myself I was protecting the family, protecting the Wallace name. But I'd forgot the most important thing. Integrity. You didn't forget, I replied. You chose to ignore it. Silence stretched. Then he spoke, quietly. I'm not asking for forgiveness, I don't deserve it. Right. But you can still do one last right thing. Cooperate. Name every person involved, every shareholder, every cover-up you were part of. He nodded. I've started. And I will continue. I just want you to know. You were right. As painful as it was, you did the right thing. I chose to live in delusion until the end. I placed my hand on the cold glass tabletop. On the other side, he laid his over mine, separated by that one unbreakable layer. I didn't come here to keep this memory for you, I said. I came to carry it as a warning. And I won't repeat your mistakes. I stood up, offered a small nod. Goodbye, Dad. Good luck, Aurora. I walked out of the visitation room, sunlight streaking in through the prison glass. With every step I took down that corridor, I felt a little lighter. Not because it was over, but because I had finally crossed the deepest fear I'd ever carried. Facing the truth about my own family. 1 month after the first court hearing, Logan, once the legal face of Huxley, now sat in a small office at Clean Earth Legal Aid, a nonprofit providing free legal services to communities affected by industrial pollution. I visited him on an early summer morning. His office held nothing more than a wooden desk, a few stacks of case files, and a photo frame of Carla and their newborn twins. Their names were Riley and Hope. There's a single mom near the old plant site in Mississippi, Logan said while pouring coffee. Her son was just diagnosed with soft tissue cancer, She can't afford a lawyer. I'm flying there next week. I sat across from him, unable to hide my surprise. Who would have thought? Logan Wallace. Once the defender of corporate image, now the voice for the forgotten. Maybe because I used to be silent, I know exactly what that fear feels like, he answered, eyes heavier than before. And maybe I want to do something that ensures my kids don't grow up with the Wallace name as a symbol of guilt. I handed him a folder. This is a list of companies showing signs of toxic dumping, falsified environmental reports, or shell game accounting, just like Huxley. I'll be investigating them one by one. Logan scanned it, then looked up. Are you making a film for each? No. I shook my head. A series. 5 parts. Broadcast nationally, subtitled in 5 languages. Funded by the International Independent Press Fund. I signed the contract yesterday. His eyes lit up. Not for the exposure, but for something deeper. For the first time, justice was no longer trapped in private boardrooms. That afternoon, I met my mother at a newly opened community center in South Portland. She was teaching a small class called Legal Basics for High-Risk Neighborhoods. Her former party gowns had been replaced with a rolled-sleeve white blouse and flats. The students did well today, she said as we sorted handouts. A 12-year-old boy asked me, "If I see a plant dumping stuff in the river, who do I call?" I couldn't help but smile. "And what did you tell him?" I said, "Call Aurora Wallace." We both laughed. Not the laughter of people who had won, but of people who had walked through wreckage, and still found the strength to plant something new. That night, I worked alone in my new studio. Not the cramped apartment I once had, but a collaborative space, sponsored by 3 independent news organizations. Beneath soft yellow lights, I opened the first episode of my new docuseries. The title faded in. Who else is burying the truth? The screen showed an older woman pointing toward a red-stained river behind her house. My family's lived here for 3 generations. This land used to give us fish. Now they float up dead, and the officials just tell us not to make noise. I paused and opened an email from a group of journalism students in Colorado. "We want to learn how you investigate and tell stories. Would you be our mentor?" I typed back. "Absolutely, start with the truth, always the truth." Days later, I returned to the federal prison not to see my father, but to hand the warden a file. Richard Wallace's sworn testimony. It exposed Huxley's web of shareholders, who had bribed local officials for years. A facility supervisor nodded after scanning it. "We'll send this straight to the Department of Justice, it's strong." I left without looking back. On the drive home, Carla called. In the background I heard a baby crying, boiling water hissing, and her laughter. "Aurora, Hope just rolled over. She stayed on her tummy for 10 minutes and flipped back by herself. Logan says he's buying her a onesie that says, 'Justice, baby.' And Riley?" He's holding the TV remote, pretending to interview his teddy bear, classic Wallace kid. I laughed through tears. We had lost almost everything. Status, wealth, even the illusion of a perfect family. But what we still had was what mattered most. The ability to choose again. To begin again. And this time, we weren't afraid of the light anymore. Aurora's story is a powerful reminder that justice doesn't always begin in a courtroom. It often starts with the courage to speak the truth, even when it means standing against your own family. In real life, many stay silent out of fear of loss. But Aurora proved that sometimes, the only way to truly protect those we love is to break the illusion. Her choice to confront, not conceal, is what sparked real change. What do you think about Aurora's decision and her family's transformation? Do you believe they deserve forgiveness? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful, real-life stories about family, truth, and justice.